guys, xin chào. This is Alicia and I am here in Da Nang for episode number 2 of Alicia Learns Vietnamese. Today's episode is called Vietnamese is Easy, and this is somewhat of a controversial title because I have heard from so many people, both expats who've been living in Vietnam for years and travelers who are just kind of moving their way through the country and maybe trying to do a little Duolingo, trying to learn a little bit of the language. And the consensus seems to be this language is so incredibly difficult, and even that it's impossible to learn. So I wanted to make a video maybe as a little bit of motivation or inspiration for anyone who is currently learning Vietnamese, maybe feeling a little unmotivated or a little discouraged, or anyone who's thinking about it and just kind of starting to make their initial investigations and trying to figure out, if it's worth it or if it's just completely impossible and way too difficult. So just wanted to talk about a little bit in my journey of learning Vietnamese, some of the things that have kind of been happy surprises along the way, and things that actually are easier in Vietnamese than maybe they are in some other languages. So the first thing that falls into that category has to do with numbers. And that is something that I learned pretty immediately when coming to the country. I had learned, first you learn xin chào, cảm ơn, tạm biệt, those really basic ways of interacting with people. And sort of the next step beyond that is to learn how to say, or learn how to ask the cost of something, bao nhiêu tiền, and then understand the answer. So I started by learning numbers 1 through 10. Number 1 is một, which is that low dot tone. And then you've got hai and ba, which is 2 and 3. Those have no intonation on them at all, no tones. Number 4 is bon, and that's going to be your up tone. Number 5, again, nam, no tone on that one. Sao, another up tone. And then 7 is bai, which has the little round tone, bai. Next, 8 is tam, again, up tone. Chin, up tone, and then you've got muy, which is going to be your down tone. So once I learned those 10 numbers, I found out that the way you progress on from there to say 11, 12, and so on is just 10, 1 is 11, so muy một, muy hai is 12, muy ba is 13, and so forth, all the way to get up to 20, which is just 2 10. So hai muy. So that was something that was a little bit of a relief. I didn't need to learn too many numbers beyond those first 10, except for, of course, 100 and 1,000, and I was basically good. Another thing that I learned was that if I learned the word tang, which is, again, uptone, tang, means month, and with that word and the numbers 1 through 12, you know all of your months in Vietnamese, because the way that months are expressed are just month 1, month 2, month 3, all the way through 12. So, tháng 1, tháng 2, tháng 3, tháng 4, etc., etc. After I learned that and I started kind of getting into more simple sentences in Vietnamese, I learned that the way verbs work is actually really straightforward also. So if you've ever learned a Latin-based language, you've probably had this frustration as a beginning language learner where you have to memorize so many forms of the verb. There's an I form, you form, he, she, they, etc., etc. Vietnamese is not like that at all. So there are a lot of pronouns, but the form for the verb stays the same no matter which pronoun you use. So if I say I have, it would be tôi có. You have, bạn có. Em ko, an ko, etc., etc., but the ko just stays the same no matter what. And actually, it's sort of the same no matter what tense you're speaking in. So this is something that I don't have 100% clear yet. I've heard that the different verb tenses do exist, but they're just not commonly used. So if you can give me a clearer picture on this, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. But from my understanding at least, it's much more common to express what time frame you're talking about by just giving context clues in the actual sentence. So for example, I would say I eat cookie yesterday, and that would express that I ate in the past tense a cookie, just because you heard the word yesterday, so you know I'm talking about the past, rather than in English and in many other languages where you actually have a different form of the verb. It's interesting because in Vietnamese, it feels like if you were to take that sentence structure and directly translate it to English, it almost sounds like the way a caveman talks a little bit, like I eat cookie yesterday, or also in the way adjectives are used, which is really, really straightforward as well. You would just say like rice spicy, tôm cay, instead of the rice is spicy. You don't need a lot of the same things that you do in English, like the article, auxiliary verbs or connectors, a lot of these little things that you need to make a sentence that's actually grammatically correct in English, even a very basic sentence that you need to learn basically from day one as an English language learner, you don't need that in Vietnamese. And that's something that I really like, that it doesn't sound like if you kind of just string together these chunks of meaning, these big ideas and this vocabulary that you learn at a very basic level, and you just kind of string it out there, it's actually grammatically correct. Whereas in English, it sounds very rough, and you can tell right off the bat that if you read that sentence, that person's not a native English speaker. So that's something that I really like as well. And of course, things are gonna change once you get into more complex sentences and thoughts. Then you're gonna need probably some more complicated and difficult grammar to go with that. But just at this very basic level of language learning, I think that's something that's really neat about Vietnamese. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in this video, and it's something that I mentioned in episode 1 as well, is the tones. And that's something that admittedly is really difficult about Vietnamese. I think it's something that kind of shuts people off from it right off the bat. Even for me, as someone who's never learned a tonal language before, it was really intimidating knowing that if I just, said la instead of la, the word has a completely different meaning and it completely changes. And I think there's something that is off-putting about that, or something that makes it feel really insurmountable. But I wanted to say something that I actually am really grateful for about the tones, and that's the way they're expressed in written language is exactly how they're pronounced. If you see a down tone or an up tone, that's exactly what your voice needs to do. There's a tone that kind of goes up and then down, and that's what your voice needs to do as well. Or that dot tone kind of gives you that idea that your voice needs to be kind of short and low. So yes, it is a challenge, and it's maybe not something that makes Vietnamese easy, but I think that in a way, it also is very self-explanatory, which is super useful. And that kind of ties into the next thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of things that make Vietnamese easy. It's also something that I mentioned in episode 1, and that's the fact that Vietnamese is a phonetic, or a better way to say that may be a phonemic language, meaning that every important unit of sound that you need to produce verbally is pretty closely expressed in the written version. Of course there are accents and there are variations, but if you look at a word in Vietnamese, you basically already know how to say it. And that is something that I can't even tell you how big of a plus that is as someone who, has taught English for a long time. I think that's one of the most frustrating things to have to tell my students, is that, it'll give you an idea if you look at the word, kind of some of the sounds that are probably involved in the pronunciation of it, but at the end of the day, it is just a lot of memorization. So that's something that is really great about Vietnamese, is once you kind of conquer those different sounds and you are able to produce them, you'll be able to, add any word that you see, at least read it out loud, at least know what it sounds like and recognize it. And that way you can build your vocabulary a lot faster, especially if you're studying on your own, which is something that you don't necessarily need a teacher or need to rely on a resource to know how to pronounce things, which is really cool. And yeah, so I'm gonna leave it at that for today. There might be some other little things If you think of them, if you're learning Vietnamese right now and you've run into something that you've found really a big relief in your learning process, go ahead and leave that down for me in the comments. Maybe it'll help motivate me in those moments where I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed with something, some challenge in learning Vietnamese. If you're just kind of looking into learning Vietnamese now, I hope this has inspired you and made you kind of realize that it is possible to learn and kind of push you to obtain that level of Vietnamese that you're trying to shoot for, whether it's just wanting to be able to go to a restaurant and order some pho, or if you really want to get to that next level of proficiency in the language. So I will see you guys next week. Keep studying, Vietnamese is easy, right? And I'll see you soon. Tạm biệt.